Hello everyone, Steven here. Sorry for the impromptu video, the bad lighting, and the background noise. I have to have the computer for this video. And to my subscribers who've joined for political comedy, I'm sorry that this video is not uh, quite the thing that you subscribed for yet. There, there is plans in the making. Just a little bit ago, I was working on a political comedy script that I think you will appreciate, especially if you do not like the man Bunny Sanders. But we will get to that another day. Today I want to talk a little bit about homeschooling. For those of you who don't know, I was homeschooled growing up and I loved it. It was very good for me in that I was uninvolved in bad activities. I was able to learn good behavior. I grew connections with my parents and I was able to learn in an environment that was best for me. For example, I learn the best when I'm working on my own. I do not learn well in a classroom setting, and I've told this to pretty much everybody the entirety of my time that I was in college. Most of my learning happened on my own when I was researching something that I wanted to learn. So I had a great experience with homeschooling. There are people who do not, and the reason why all of this has been brought to attention is because just recently in Effingham County, Georgia, two children were found buried in their parents' backyard. I don't have all of the details of this case. If you want to look it up, the details are they're pretty out there. You'll be able to find all the information you need, and it's sickening to see parents who could treat their children like this, or to see anyone could treat anybody like this. It's ridiculous. But that has sparked conversation that's already been happening, but even more so now than normal, as to whether or not homeschooling is dangerous. And there's a group right now that is masquerading, maybe not the right word, that's trying to do good, but I think are causing more harm than good. Something we need to be, that everybody just kind of needs to be aware of. There's a lot of bad stigma around homeschooling, and a lot of it's just from not knowing. Like for example, the old question, "Oh, you weren't socialized, were you? You don't know how to talk around people." Actually, I knew quite well how to talk around people. I was very, very well socialized. People at church knew me quite well. I was very active in the community. I even was a part-time, not a part-time, a volunteer tutor at our Savannah Baptist Center, and I had tons of interaction with people growing up of all ages, people younger, my same age, people older. There was no problem of interaction there, but it's just the stigma of not knowing. This is the stuff we have to deal with all the time. The pajamas thing is true, but that's for another day. Today I want to talk about a group and about one specific topic. So when that case has come into the forefront, now people are starting to question, well, what should we do about homeschooling then? We can't leave this just out in the open. We can't leave this problem unsolved. And there's a group that's doing a lot of work to try to solve this called the CRHE, and this is the Coalition of Responsible Homeschool Education, or Coalition of Responsible Home Education. It's a mouthful, I know. And their mission is basically to help correct homeschooling where it needs to be corrected and to fill gaps where it needs to be filled. I mean, that's a generalization. I didn't have that pulled up. I should have had that pulled up, but I mean, the mission statement's fine. There's nothing wrong with the mission statement. The problem is in their execution. The problem is in the attitude that's carried with it. The first problem that I noticed when I was researching this group is almost all of them are my age or younger. And while that's not necessarily a problem per se, there is something to be said about age and wisdom. And the problem that people my age have is we're unexperienced. We don't have a lot of knowledge. We're still learning. We're still fresh. We have the energy to get things done, but we don't necessarily have the direction. And what concerns me when I see an influential group like this getting together, all of them my age, younger, maybe a couple older, is there's not really a lot of wisdom in there. There's not really a lot of deep, logical thought and experience. And that shows in their work. So, today I'm going to specifically talk about the abuse claim that they have, and the general claim. They have another group that they link to in their page. If you look at their information, they tell you that they do support some other pages and they send out information to other pages. Like, for example, the HIC, which is the Homeschooling's Invisible Children. Homeschooling's Invisible Children. And it's a page that's dedicated to sharing the information of abuse cases, especially ones that end in death. And sounds like a pretty legitimate idea. We thrive on information, right? We have to drive policy through information, so having information is a good thing, right? Yes, except when it's got a major flaw in it. So let me give you the basics. The basics of their study is that they were looking at the statistics of child fatality between non-homeschooled and homeschooled groups. Oversimplifications, sorry, don't got all the time in the world. What they found in their research is that there's no statistical difference between deaths in homeschool families and deaths in public and private school families. And this is, and by that I mean in terms of parent-perpetrated deaths, deaths that are caused by the parent. What they say is that there is no statistical significance, that they are about equivalent. They're about the same. Anyone who tells you that there's something more, they're lying. If they're telling you that there's more reported abuse, or that homeschool families are more abusive than non-homeschooled families, they're not looking at the factual information, because I'm just quoting even a pessimistic view that says that there's no difference really in statistics if you want to talk about keeping your child safe. Seems fairly honest, right? Seems fairly straightforward. Makes some sense, I guess, in a way, because people are people. But then the question, of course, would be, would you really allow your child to be, what's that word I'm looking for? Unsupervised and unnoticed by other people. The claim is that homeschooling allows parents to hide their children and to cover up abuse. And while I'll admit that's a possibility, the question is on how often does it happen? Now, what they are claiming is that there's no statistical difference between the two. Now, you have to be careful in communication. And if any of you from CRHE or HIC, which, by the way, they're the same people. They're linked to each other in their How to Get in Touch with Us segments. Echo chamber. Anyways. What you need to be careful of when you communicate things like this is, are you getting across the right message? Remember what I said earlier. Homeschooling's got a lot of stigma around it. This only fuels that stigma. Now you can argue, if it's true, then it needs to be fueled, right? Well, let's look at that for a moment, okay? And actually, we don't have to look very far, because both pages admit the major flaw with these studies. So there's no statistical difference, right? No statistical difference in terms of child deaths perpetrated by the parents between homeschool families, non-homeschool families. No statistical difference. It's about the same, right? Except for one thing. And I quote to you now from the CRHE webpage. And I will put both of these web pages and these exact pages in the description of this video. This will be after, if you're watching it like a few minutes after. Anyways, they'll be there. They will be there. If they're not there, come check back later. In most cases of abuse in homeschooling situations, children were physically abused before being homeschooled. Their withdrawal from school marked the beginning of a new phase in their abuses, as their parents found they could abuse without restraint. Sounds pretty dark and pretty bad, right? Homeschooling's got a really bad light on it. Time out. Do you see what that says? In most cases of abuse in homeschooling situations, children were physically abused before being homeschooled. That's the first point to consider. And the other page as well, the HIC also says the same thing, and a little bit more thoroughly, which I like. I like thoroughness, even if your premise is wrong. Another interesting question, this is in a kind of like a question and answer-ish thing where they don't cite the people questioning. Another interesting question would be, how many of these families were already involved in the court system, social service, and school systems? Here's their response. We do not have enough data to answer this question with statistical accuracy. Fair. That's fair. It is true, though, that in many of the cases listed on HIC, abuse or neglect had been previously reported by school officials or investigated by social services. That's a big deal. You want to talk about homeschooling? That's a big deal. That is a crucial piece of information. It continues on. In the cases we have studied, we have noticed a pattern where abusive parents pull their children from school to homeschool them after an initial social service investigation does not find enough proof to open a case or shortly after a social service case is closed. That is crucial to the conversation. That is a centerpiece to this conversation about homeschooling and abuse. What that says is the majority of these cases that they're reporting, the abuse was already happening and they were withdrawn to homeschooling as a reaction. You need to be careful how you present this. You have to be careful, because if you're not careful, you are giving ammunition to homeschool critics who would have nothing to do with homeschooling whatsoever. You have to be careful with how this is presented. It goes on and it gives some detail as to why that is. Regardless of how a child is educated, it frequently takes numerous reports and social service visits to affirm that abuse is occurring in a home. This is because, and this is important, this is because social service employees must meet a high burden of proof by removing children from school and thus from further contact with mandatory reporters. These parents ensure that there will be no further reports of abuse or neglect. This allows them to conceal their maltreatment. There's a high burden of proof, and it takes multiple reports. Okay, we understand this. All right, that's perfectly understandable. But does that mean then that the problem is with homeschooling? This is where the logic comes into play. So I was just talking with my mom about this because my mom is the one that brought this to my attention. The problem that I see is that the issue is not so much with the logic. The problem is with the dispersion of information. And we see this in our mass media as well. And hello peoples who came for a social comment or a political commentary. Hello. This is for you. We see this all the time in the news media. We see people talking about Trump and how the Russia investigations. And we've reported on this quite a lot, and we've been ridiculed about it quite a lot because we report about Trump and Russia quite a lot, even though there's quite a lot of nothing we have to report on. Information is important, because if that's all you see, if all you see is the mainstream media, you would take Trump to be evil. You would take him out to be the worst president in American history, because that's how he's painted. That is where the information is going, is saying that Trump is a bad president. But if you balance that out with online references, specifically YouTube references, like for example, Steven Crowder, The Daily Wire, and Dennis Prager, you're going to see a different picture with information that you did not hear from the mainstream media. That's because information is being made available now. And once information is made available, then we can introduce the logic. So, what's the information? Originally, no statistical difference between homeschool violence and non-homeschool violence. But then also, these children were abused in majority of cases before being homeschooled. That's the information. And now we can follow the logic. And by that logic, we can find the problem may not be with the homeschooling situation. Could it be that there's areas that we need to address in DFACS? We've known for a while that DFACS needs to have reforming done. We had a professor here at the school that I work for who was part-time DFACS employee, used to be full-time. And he says that he was always happy to do it because as terrible as he said it was, and as messed up and corrupt as the system is, he feels the need to be there to help reform it, to be a voice of reason, to be a voice that pushes it in the right direction. An insight from a DFACS employee that's needed. The reform there, is that Mother? I think that is Mother. Hang on, guys. The reform in DFACS is needed. That is crucially important information. Maybe that's where our focus needs to be. I'm not saying it 100% is, but I'm saying the angle that we're being given is not necessarily correct. We need other information. We need to take the information that exists and use it to redirection us where we need to go. Because attacking homeschooling and legislating homeschooling isn't going to help if that's not where the issue is. The issue is these cases, in the majority of cases, were known and nothing was done. It could be due to lack of evidence, it could be a problem in the system. I think that needs to be looked at much more closely. I think you guys, especially y'all, CRHE, need to redirection yourselves to focus on that, because that's where the problem is. This is where you need a logician on your team. You need somebody who's going to sit down, who's going to look at all of the information and say, all right, what direction is this information headed in? What does this information actually mean? Because if you're just tossing out numbers, you're going to mislead and it's going to be bad. Now, let me point out a quote that is from the CHRE page that I think is worth talking about. We believe, based on these cases, that a system flagging families that leave school system to homeschool after a history of frequent social service involvement or numerous reports would be an important step in preventing homeschooling from being used by some families as a cover for abuse or neglect. I am with you on that. I haven't thought through it in its entirety. I haven't looked at it in its entirety, but just on the surface, I'm with you there. So why is that not the focus? That needs to be the focus, because that addresses the problem where it is. The problem is we have this reported. We can't do much about it yet. They're trying to withdraw. Problem. Bing. I think that's worth looking at and talking about. I think that's where the conversation needs to be had. It doesn't need to be had on the question of whether or not homeschooling is some kind of evil, which, by the way, you guys are being used that way. And I'll have to talk to you guys later. Bye. Pardon me for that, my peeps. I needed to take care of something real quick. Basically, the summary is, I think the direction needs to be made more clear. And we need to focus on the issue at hand. The issue at hand is reported, something needs to be done. I am interested to talk about this flagging idea. I am interested to talk about not allowing sexual abuse felons to homeschool. Those are conversations that need to be had. But these broad brush statements have to stop. If you want people to quit making big qualms about homeschooling, you've got to stop with these broad brush strokes because it's only going to cause more problems. That's about all I have for you guys.